Hi everyone, I'm Joel with Madison Creations. Today's project is a project for a charity drive called Woodworkers Fighting Cancer. They provide a specific plan, we build the project, submit a video of the build back to them, and in turn they donate to charity. This year the charity is St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So it's a great project for a great cause, so let's get right to the build. The project this year is a small student desk. It's very useful given the amount of homeschooling taking place during the pandemic. I started by breaking down a quarter sheet of 1/2-inch plywood. This is used for the top, bottom, sides, and back stretcher of the desk. I set up the stop block on my MFT3 to 24 inches to cut the top and bottom pieces for the desk. I use a cordless track saw, and as you can see, just as I started my cut, the batteries died. But this turned out to be one of those lucky moments because I was looking for more batteries and I realized I first was supposed to rip the side pieces and the back stretcher out of this piece of plywood before I cut it in half for the top and bottom. Again, sometimes you just get lucky. So after ripping those two pieces, I was back to the MFT to cut down the top and bottom. Double check for square, then I use these pieces to set up my stop block for the side pieces. This assures me that all the parts will be exactly the same size and prevents me from making a mistake with the tape measure and pencil line. Now I can cut my two side pieces to length. Glue and 1-inch brad nails is all that is needed to hold this together. I always check for square after putting a clamp on like this because the clamp can easily pull the piece to one side or the other. I then attach the top using the same method. And now it's 4 a.m. the next morning and I'm already out in the shop. It was my only option for getting this project done in time. The remaining pieces are cut using a single 2x4, so I added one extension onto my miter saw, not only for the support, but because it has a built-in stop block that is really handy. The 2 legs and 2 feet are cut to rough dimensions. You can see here I had a few inches of waste material, so I cut around these large knots in this 2x4. Now I ran each piece through the jointer 3 times on the face and 3 times on one side. I then ripped each piece on the table saw, and here I realized this left a much better surface than the jointer did on this very soft wood. So I actually trimmed both sides off at the saw. Again, I didn't really care about the exact dimensions as long as everything is the same. I surfaced the last faces on the planer. And with stop set to final dimension, I cut both legs and both feet at the miter saw. Now I had to cut several half-lap joints, and for some strange reason, I could not locate my stacked dado blade that I would normally use in my table saw for this joint. I guess you can expect some shop organization videos in the near future. So I thought I'd try a new, although much less efficient technique and use my miter saw to cut the half-laps. This particular saw has this little green lever I can turn and cause the blade to stop at whatever depth I dial it into. So I set it up to cut through to the halfway point and started cutting. Once I knew I had the right setting, I cut out the first half lap in one of the feet. It was a lot of repetitive cuts, but in an odd way, it reminded me of back when I used to do barbecue competitions and I'd just get into a groove, slicing a brisket, making perfect cuts every time. I set up stop blocks on both ends so I could repeat the exact cut in the second foot. This technique leaves a pretty rough joint, so I lowered my blade a fraction of an inch and just slid the board back and forth, taking off some of those rough saw marks. Here you can see how rough it was before, and then how it looks after. Still not perfectly smooth, but good enough for this application. Now more half laps at each end of the legs, one to attach the foot and the other to the desk top. With everything fitting nicely, all I had left was to cut the notch for the back stretcher that connects both legs underneath the desk. I did this on my table saw and again set up stop blocks to ensure I could get a repeatable cut. It is important to make sure you don't make two identical legs. There is a left and a right, and they have to mirror each other for everything to come together properly. Now the feet are glued to the leg, and although this is a super strong joint, I opted to countersink a couple of screws in it just for added security. Before any further assembly, I sanded everything down to 150 grit. I then put a chamfer on all edges using my trim router. Now I'm using my metal ruler to transfer the dimension for how far back the leg sits in the foot. This is then transferred to the desk top. This will allow everything to line up properly and once again keeps me from having to rely on a tape measure. I wanted to test fit the legs and at the same time mark the length of the back stretcher. I'm not sure why I was using such long clamps. You can see I struggled with them, sometimes more than others. Speaking of clamps, here's a tip when you don't really have the right clamp to secure a part. I used wood glue on the outside of this joint, but put CA glue, which is basically super glue, in the center of the joint. This way the CA glue sets quickly with simple hand pressure, but the joint will benefit from the strength of the wood glue. I then used 3 screws to attach the leg from the inside of the desk to pull everything together. The back stretcher is glued and nailed into place, and everything gets a final chamfer and hand sanding up to 180 grit. I chose to finish this with a simple coat of shellac as I'm most certain it will end up getting a coat of paint sometime here in the near future. And that wraps up the desk project for Woodworkers Fighting Cancer 2020. It happened to be completed on my daughter's 3rd birthday, and she seemed very excited to have a new desk to play on. Thanks to everyone who supports Woodworkers Fighting Cancer, and thanks for watching. And now get out in your shop and get creative.